and I feel as an institution it's an interesting model.
So would you recommend that such an organisation was started here which had no government funding whatsoever?
I think in the area of the arts, I mean, obviously Nesta works across a whole range of areas, but in the particular area of the arts, it's clearly the case that there's leadership gap, you know, in the sense that institutions, for good reasons, don't have the abilities and the independence to look at the long term. These issues of how do you measure cultural value are not solved overnight. It's a long game. You know, coming up with equivalent additions, building the narrative that you were just saying that exists in science isn't going to be done overnight. So you need someone who's empowered to look to the long term. And unfortunately, there aren't many institutions that have that freedom. Therefore, an institution that's set up in its governance and its financing to look at the long term is clearly a good thing. So, yeah, my view would be that, from what I understand of the Australian cultural policy situation, is that it would be very helpful.
Now, I'm just wondering, time-wise, is it time to perhaps call for questions from the floor, and then we can go back to the speakers? Yeah. We've got two microphones be wandering around. Could I ask for questions, please? This gentleman here.
This more a comment to Hassan. Working both in the arts and in the environment, I totally agree with you about the necessity for economic valuations. But I would say that having researched economic valuations in the environment since the 1950s, the willingness to pay has never influenced a policy decision in Australia at all, and in fact most of those studies are simply put to one side, and there's been a considerable amount of them. So while I agree with you totally, and I'm sure willingness to pay has some indications in it, it just doesn't work as a communication tool. But I think you might have hinted at that.
Just a very brief response on that. I mean, I'm not an environmental specialist, but the example that has always inspired me in that area is the fact that who would have thought 20 years ago, when I was studying, who would have imagined that we would have a situation where not only people would be comfortable with pricing a clean environment, that we'd actually have a trading mechanism, an institution set up to allow people to buy and sell the right to pollute, which is what we've got in Europe in the carbon trading mechanism. So actually, I think there is a very deep sense in which valuation and making explicit the costs and benefits of different activities can actually overturn the way we think. Now, imagine in health as well. 20 years ago, we've got something called the National Institute of Clinical Excellence